Okay, we are recording. I am joined today by Darren Hudson Hick, who is a philosopher at Furman University. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
We're talking about your paper, When is a Work of Art Finished, from Journal of Aesthetics and Art Criticism in 2008. And so in that paper, and I need to preface all of this by saying I'm deeply sympathetic to your view.
Yay.
And so like coming up with stuff to challenge it was a bit difficult, but I tried my best. And so in that paper, you offer a sufficient condition for work completion, right? When a work of art is finished. And one consequence of that sufficient condition is that each time an author publishes or publicizes a work of art, right, makes it available for public consumption, they have thereby created a new work of art. And so in the
If
sense
they've
of,
changed it.
if they've changed, yes, absolutely, if they've changed it. And so, there are several Star Wars A New Hopes in existence because George Lucas continually tinkers with them and republishes them and so forth.
And the first one's not even A New Hope. That didn't come in until like 97.
Exactly. It was originally Star Wars for years and years and years until they retitled it. And there are multiple Blade Runners, there are multiple Middlemarches, there are multiple Frankensteins, right? Because Mary Shelley originally published it in 3 volumes and then collected them all and then revised them like 14 years later. And so there are multiple instances of these works. And that view, I think, is very intuitive for the non-plastic arts, right? Where you can have 2 versions of the same film or 2 versions of the same piece of music existing side by side. Whereas with the plastic arts, I think the case may be a bit more difficult. And so you can imagine a painter who, has their work hung in a gallery, but then they decide they want to make some changes, they add some paint to it, and then they say they're done and it's publicized. And so now there are 2 paintings that exist simultaneously on the same canvas. The second painting is obscuring the first, right? And then they could continually do that such that, change it, republicize, to the point where there are 20, 30, 40 paintings existing on one and the same canvas. And that seems a bit unintuitive, I think. So what do you have to say in response to a case of that sort?
I disagree. I would say, all right, let's make it a simple case first, and then we'll come back to the complicated version that you're raising. Okay, so it's not unusual for artists working in paint, especially to reuse materials, right? This is normal. So let's say that you have a painter, he has a show, puts up a bunch of stuff, and some of it gets really good feedback. People love it. They buy it up, whatever. And others, people are like, meh, who cares? So rather than going and buying a new canvas, what he does is he takes that painting off the wall, covers it with a new layer of primer, white paint, and paints a new picture on top of it. So it's not unusual for us to look at old paintings with x-rays and find there were paintings underneath that. Okay, that's not weird, right? So the artist does that. He takes the canvas down. He's either destroyed the original painting or, like you say, he's obscured it. It sort of depends whether it's recoverable, I guess. And so he paints a new painting on, has another show, and people love that painting, and that one again, don't care about that. He takes it down, he puts another layer of primer on it, he paints a new thing. All right, so we've got, as you put it, 3 paintings, 1 canvas, but of course, the newest one is always covering the oldest one, right? Okay, I think that's pretty intuitive. I'm fine with that, even though we have one and the same base physical object that we've just added layers to. So I'm thinking that the case you're raising is just where the covering of the previous painting is not complete, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Little ontology joke there. So we've incorporated that visual into the next visual. And I think when I look at the sort of simple case that I just raised, it makes me much more accepting of this case to say, okay, so they kept some of the old painting and added a new painting to it. Okay, that's fine. So the new painting, if we think in type token terms, the new painting includes elements that the old painting does and also includes some new elements. So the new painting is sort of a complex painting in that regard. I'm okay with that.
And you're okay that that process could be redone multiple times so that you have multiple paintings.
I think it
Um,
is done multiple times. I don't
yeah,
think this is that unusual. Um, I think it's unusual for it to go in these little iterative steps
yeah,
that are introduced into the case. Um, but I think we would largely treat it the same way. So imagine that Da Vinci had created the Mona Lisa, and nobody gives a damn, as they didn't for centuries. So he decides what he's really going to do is he's going to throw the critics for a loop. There weren't critics at the time, but let's pretend there were. And so what he does is he paints a mustache on the Mona Lisa and hangs that up again. Are we going to say that these are the same painting, the original Mona Lisa and mustachioed Mona Lisa, that everything that's critically true about one is critically true about the other? Of course not. All right, the new painting's ridiculous. It's a farce. The old painting is just sort of a paint by numbers flop. Well, we have two different critical objects, and so we have two things. Those things are works of art. One is good, one is not. I'll leave it to you to decide which is which.
yeah. And as a result of putting the mustache on, the first object, right, the first painting, sort of ceases to be an object for critical consumption because it's been obscured by the mustache, right? The people,
Yeah.
if had photographs existed of it, maybe they could have, engaged with it critically through photographs. Uh,
They
and
can work with their memories
yeah, work
and
with their
say, all
memories.
right,
Yeah.
I have a pretty good memory of what this thing looked like before it had a Fu Manchu on it, and I think it looks better now. Right? You're comparing two different things. Um, yeah. Now, of course, we could do all of that stuff pre-publication too, right? We could do all that just in the artist's studio. When the artist got a canvas, he got a picture of a woman and says, I don't care for it. Maybe even based on friends who've come over and said, Leo, I don't get it, right? What's she doing? She's boring. Give her a mustache. And he paints a mustache on her. At that point, I would say, well, it might be that we had two works of art, or it might be that there was just one work of art. My view doesn't really say what happens pre-publication. And I'm okay with that. I think the fact that my view doesn't say nicely tracks the fact that I have no idea. And I think I think that's okay.
Yeah, gotcha. And I agree with that. So let's shift the case from
All right.
painting to sculpture. And let's imagine that we have a sculptor who, has her sculpture shown in an art gallery, right? And so by your view, it's finished. It's a complete work of art.
If it was
And
shown with her consent and
yes,
without explicit declaration to the contrary. Yeah.
yes, exactly. If someone didn't put a gun to her head and said, "You have to show this," it's done now. So yeah, as long as it's uncoerced and it has no declaration to the contrary. And so she does that. It's a finished work of art in your view. But then she changes her mind and she adds some stuff to the sculpture, right? She doesn't take anything away or change the original object, but she adds to it, right?
Sure.
And so she publicizes it again with her consent. She doesn't have any declaration to the contrary. And so in your view, then there's two sculptures there. There's the original that's now being obscured by this second sculpture, right? So no problem there. That sort of
Mhm.
aligns with what we were saying about the painting case. But now imagine that the painter is deeply, or not the painter, the sculptor is deeply indecisive. She changes her mind and says, you know what, that stuff I added, it doesn't look really good. Maybe she got critical feedback that was negative. And so she removes it, right? And decides to republish it, right? That, okay, I removed the stuff I added. So now the original artwork is present. I think in that case, it's intuitive to say, all she's done is she's unobscured the first sculpture. The first sculpture is now there. But I think in your view, because it's a third act of publication, we now have three different sculptures. One, the original, the second one, which is ceased to exist, and then the third one, which is qualitatively and materially indistinguishable from the first, right? They look exactly the same. They're made from the exact same stuff, and materially they're the same object. And so I think that seems a bit counterintuitive. And so what would you have to say in response to that case?
Okay, I would say two things. So first, if let's say I publish a novel in a simple case, and I do so uncoerced without some declaration that this is an unfinished novel, right? It's a normal novel. So I publish that thing, and I publish it in hardcover, and it comes out, and everyone loves the book so much that they demand a soft cover because they want to pay less for it. Fine. So the publisher of the hardcover sells the publishing rights to some softcover publisher, as they normally do, and now the softcover edition comes out, right? They haven't changed the pagination. They haven't changed anything. The only thing they've changed is whether it's got a hardcover or a softcover, which I don't think is part of the work anyway. All right. This is a second act of publication, but I don't think it makes a new work because the work was already finished. So you're not refinishing the work. So my first answer to this case and my first intuition is that if we want to go in that direction, then it's not a second act of publication that would somehow make for a new work. The work was already finished. So it's not refinishing it. It's just selecting and arranging those same elements as the same work, right? No different than publishing the soft cover. That's my first intuition on this. And I think that's probably how we would read this, is to say, all right, we had a re-release of the work that we saw before. Okay, that's fine. But now let's play with your weird case, because artists are weird. Artists make weird choices. So let's say our artist does all the things that you've described she does, and now she says, and this is sculpture 1A, right? She signals that this is a different work by giving it a different name. Moreover, I think that a name is part of the work, so I think that would do well here. But otherwise, it is materially, visually indistinguishable from the original. So how do I deal with that case? I would say, I guess there's a reasonable chance that we've got another work here. I'm okay with it. It would be strange, and I think it's only interesting because it's strange. I think people would only care about it because it's strange. So how would this work under, some ontological view? I would say that, well, we could have two types, right? This is sort of a type token thing, each with a single token, and those tokens happen to have exactly the same formal elements and exactly the same material elements, but are somehow distinct works because the two abstract things are just abstract things. One is created at time t1, one is created at time t2. Actually, on my view, that's enough to make them distinct works. See other things I've published, but I'm okay with that. Is the public going to buy it? No, the public's going to think this is stupid, right? And maybe it is. I'm okay with that. Not every artistic effort is going to be a success, but yeah, I'm okay with that in principle. Artists do weird things, and our ontology should track artistic practice. Now, not just like the decisions that artists make, right? Not every artistic decision is going to be a winner. They're not all going to succeed. Part of artistic practice is how do we respond to it, right? How do we start treating these things? So if you were a critic in this sort of scenario, would you look at work 1B and say, that's just the same work?
Yeah, that this is trite, this is a rehash, right? That the artist has literally done nothing to that object other than remove what they had previously added. It's, now maybe there's a case to be made that this is a conceptual piece where we have one material object that's being inhabited by two works of art, and so it could be critically analyzed in that way. But I feel like most critics and most of the viewing public would just say they have not created a new work of art as a result of this action.
Okay, here's how our philosophically savvy sculptor is going to respond. She's
Sure.
going to say, are you saying that this sculpture is trite now?
Whereas before it wasn't trite. Or, I mean, what you could say is that the first sculpture, Oh no, you can't say that, can you? If you think it's one and the same object, right? One and the same work of art. Um, yeah, so there are a couple ways to think of it. One is that the original sculpture wasn't Trite, but the second, or I guess now the third one, is Trite because it's just a rehash of the first one. But if you think that that it's the first and the third are identical objects, right? That they're one and the same work of art, then has their activity made something that wasn't previously Trite now Trite?
So there's
Yeah,
a couple of ways we can deal with that,
yeah,
right? We could say that the second object is not a second object and it's not trite, the act is trite, right? That the artist has done something trite by just doing this. Another way around it is to say that, yeah, the work was finished at time T1 with the original publication, but that didn't mean that everything that is true about that work is now cemented, right? We could say it has garnered additional properties, like it has been, some artworks are influential, but they're not influential when they're made, right? They're influential as a result of other things. We would say it's true that the work is influential, but not that the work itself has changed. Things that are true about the work have changed. So we could say something like that. I think our artist wants to say, look, I've made a new thing that looks just like the original, but because of what I did in the interim, I have made it with surprising properties. Right now, it's ironic. Now it is all these things. I think this is a sexy case. This is great.
right. And so, I mean, I think a somewhat parallel case is, just going off of what you said, that some works of art gain properties as a result of subsequent works of art. And so, you know, uh, Star Wars The Force Awakens and Star Wars Rise of Skywalker become worse movies or sorry, uh, what's number 8? The Last Jedi. There we go. I know this better than you, I think. Force Awakens and The Last Jedi become worse films as a result of Rise of Skywalker, right? That 7 and 8 become worse in virtue of 9, right? That, 9 undid a lot of the good making features of 7 and 8. And so I think that, that aligns with the point that subsequent actions can affect the properties that an earlier, an already existing object can possess. And so, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this thought, but you pick that up for me, please.
Well, so I think that this weird sort of ontological case is going to depend on uptake by an audience, right? It's a weird case because there's no clear answer to it. And ontology is the sort of thing that, well, I think it depends on practice. And if we don't have an established practice, we don't have a clear answer. And sometimes we press the point, right? Sometimes we press the point and we're successful. So like 4 minutes and 33 seconds. When John Cage first did that, it was soundly rejected by critics. Not just rejected as bad, rejected as non-art, rejected as not a thing. Nothing happened there. It's hilarious to go back and read the reviews from 1952. But he pressed it, right? He pressed the point, he kept doing it, and eventually people said, yeah, that piece of music consisting of 3 clumpings of musicians not playing their instruments, yeah, that is a stupid work of art, but still a work of art, right? He pressed it, he forced us to make a decision, and we did. Okay. So whether or not our sculptor in this case is able to make some sort of ontological claim here depends not just on what she wants to be true, but whether or not people pick it up and say, yep, okay, fine, right? We have to make a decision, and the decision is this is a new work and it's stupid, or it's a new work and what groundbreaking work it is, or all you've done is took the hat off of it and it's the same sculpture again. Stop playing a shell game with me. I think they're all interesting results, but I don't think that ontology like tracks some sort of natural feature in the world that we can just look at independent of practice and say, well, then that's the outcome.
Yeah, and I think so. Imagine that, an art buyer, right, is willing to pay double, because there's two works of art, right? And so, originally she was going to charge, say, 10,000. Now she's charging 20,000 because there's two sculptures, right, that happen to be in the same material object, right? If someone were willing to buy that, right, and if that person were to donate it to a museum, and there were two, on the wall text, right, there's like two acquisition numbers, right, because two works of art were acquired, right? And if people were to start treating this as not one sculpture but two sculptures, then you think, is the result of that the ontology changes, or that no, it was always two works of art, it's just finally people are accepting that it was two works of art?
All right, let's take your complicated case and turn it into an acceptable one, and we can come back to it.
Okay.
So let's say that I'm an artist and I buy her sculpture, and let's put aside whether or not it is two sculptures or one sculpture. We'll just take the easy case and say it's one sculpture, and I make an installation piece at my local gallery, and that's the centerpiece for my installation piece, and you buy the installation. I don't know why people buy installation pieces, but they do, right? And you want to put it in your rec room or something, I guess. Okay, how many works of art have you bought?
Yeah, have you bought one installation piece? Have you bought the installation piece plus the sculpture of which it's a part? Right?
I think you've bought at least two artworks
Yeah.
here. I'm okay with that. So let me give you a real world case then. So, and I've written about this one because it's just so freaking weird. Okay, so there's a book. I'm going to back this up. Jack Kerouac's On the Road. Okay, so famously, and probably not really, Jack Kerouac sets out on the road and just writes this travelogue as he reports it on one long piece of paper, the scroll, and then he publishes that thing, and that's all there is. Okay, so there's a guy named Simon Morris who started a website called Getting Inside Jack Kerouac's Head, and it was just a blog. And all he wanted to do for the blog is know what it was like to write the words that Jack Kerouac wrote. So every day on his blog, he would retype one page of On the Road. And then he did this for about a year, right? There's about 300 pages in the scroll edition of On the Road. And then when he was done, he decided he was going to collect all of his blog entries together into a book. So he published his book, which is Getting Inside Jack Kerouac's Head by Simon Morris. And it is just word for word a retyping in page reversed order of On the Road. Okay, so according to Simon Morris, this is an object, right? He was trying to make a new art object. And it's an art object that arguably contains On the Road. If I want to read Jack Kerouac's On the Road, I just have to read Getting Inside Jack Kerouac's Head from last page to front page. So insofar as Getting Inside Jack Kerouac's Head is an artwork, right? A weird conceptual artwork, but an artwork. If I bought a copy of it, and I did, do I now have two different artworks? One is On the Road and one is Getting Inside Jack Kerouac's Head.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, I would say you have two works of art there. That somehow you're getting a deal, right, by buying Inside Jack Kerouac's Head or whatever it's called, right?
Yeah, and then somebody else wrote Getting Inside Simon Morris's Head, and they did a page-for-page retyping of Getting Inside Jack Kerouac's Head in page-reversed order. So that thing is now just word for word On the Road. If I buy that, am I buying three artworks? I mean, that's a sweet deal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the more people that do this, the better the deal you're getting, so long as the price isn't going up, right?
Well, I mean, at this point, the snake is eating its own tail, so there's only so far we can go with it.
Yeah.
But I think that's normal, right? So Alice in Wonderland contains poems, right? It's got the Jabberwocky in there. The Jabberwocky is an artwork in and of itself on its own, and this thing contains that thing. Our only weird case about the sculpture is that they are formally indistinguishable.
Yep.
And that's weird. But I mean, it wouldn't be interesting if it wasn't weird.
Yeah. Awesome. So on that note, I think we should wrap this up. So thank you so much, Darren. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Take care.